I'm Larry Maccheroni. Did you know that only 21% of companies surveyed by Freedom Dynamics in this survey believe that their organization's culture is ready to enable the security folks to work with the operations folks to work with the developers? It's a pretty depressing statistic. The culture, the ability of folks to collaborate together is a hindrance to actually achieving this somewhat technical, I wouldn't say straightforward, but not as messy as the people aspects of culture change, goal of DevSecOps. So that's what this talk is about today, but a little bit about my background before we get into that so you know where I'm coming from. Virginia Tech, graduated with electrical computer engineering degree. Any Hokies in the room? Oh, man. You know UVA people though, right? Oh man, get out of here. We don't want you here. No ODU people. Virginia Tech just was majorly upset by ODU over the weekend. Very depressing. While I was still at Tech, I started my first business, grew it to 80 employees, 20 million a year in sales. Our number one client was GE Power Generation. We wrote the software that controlled 60% of the world's power generation. If the bad guys were able to attack that software, they could literally bring down the world's power grid. So we got really good at writing software that was essentially free of vulnerabilities. Developed a whole framework for that. I actually spun out a separate company called Qualtrics to actually sort of market that. Some of the folks at Carnegie Mellon saw what I was doing and trying to change the world and make us write more secure software. So they invited me to come there, and I helped found an organization at Carnegie Mellon called the Lab, Cybersecurity Lab. While I was there, I also met up with Nooper Davis, who is now the Chief Information Security Officer at Comcast, where I now work. And Nooper and I launched the Build Security In initiative for the Department of Homeland Security. Now, this was essentially the packaging of the framework that we had developed at my first startup company for better consumption, easier consumption outside of that small domain that we were in. It failed. I don't know how many of you have heard of Build Security In. Have any of you heard of Build Security In? One person here. So I saw maybe somebody move back there, but were you just scratching your nose? So one person has heard of Build Security In here. I didn't change the world. And the reason for that, I think, is largely because too much of the most effective, best bang for the buck activities associated with securing your products had nothing to do with developers, are mostly operational and perimeter type activities. And so those operations, those ops and DevOps activities got much more attention, and companies have invested 90% of their cybersecurity dollars in infrastructure security and only 10% in software security. And my message was completely around software security. So I got frustrated. I left Carnegie Mellon. I went to go work for Rally Software. How many people have heard of Rally? Okay, anyone use Rally? Anyone using Rally? Yeah. So do you like the charts in Rally? Okay, well, I didn't design those charts. But the ones that... So I was the director of analytics and research for Rally Software. My team was responsible for all the charting functionality inside of Rally. But the reason I went to Rally was that I thought it was a better opportunity to change the world than staying at Carnegie Mellon. The reason for that is that Rally has a multi-tenant SaaS stack where all of the data is in a single database. So I thought that if I could crawl through that data, tens of thousands of teams, literally, and extract performance characteristics like productivity, predictability, quality, responsiveness, and correlate those with characteristics of decisions that teams make, everything from iteration length to the gender diversity of a team, that we could then literally change the behavior and the practice. And that was largely successful. I published the largest ever study correlating practices with those elements of performance, and I'm well known for that in the industry. I just gave a big talk at the Agile conference a month or so ago. I'm still an active developer. I believe very strongly that you cannot get up here on the stage, that you cannot be defining a framework for developer behavior unless you're an currently active developer. Too many people in the security world were once developers but haven't written a line of code in 10 years or more. And a lot of them were never developers. And for them to be telling developers how to do it right is just, it falls flat. They have no credibility with that. So I maintain a dozen or so open source projects. I write code every day. I'm handling pull requests literally every day. One of my open source projects gets over 200,000 downloads a month. So not a trivial amount of usage of my products, my software products. But I am full-time employed at Comcast now. Newport Davis brought me on board to do DevSecOps transformation. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about here today is stuff that's sort of evolved prior to me coming to Comcast, but I really think we've nailed it and have it nicely packaged now since I got to Comcast. Let me start with a couple of definitions. I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the term DevSecOps. In one sense, I like that it emphasizes the security aspect, but in another sense, I believe that if you are actually doing DevOps right, you're going to be doing security. If you read the Phoenix Project, it very much had an element of security as part of the story there. That's why I put the sec-specific stuff in parentheses here. The definition is just as good in my mind if you drop that blue stuff out of the definition. It's all about empowered engineering teams taking ownership of how their product behaves in production, including security. And that is a fundamentally different way of thinking about DevOps than a lot of other folks do. A lot of folks think of it as mostly automation or only automation. Some folks think of it as a role. I'm a DevOps engineer, which means that's just a new name for what we used to call ops engineers, but now the ops engineers have to write scripting, configuration as code kind of thing. Some folks do call it culture change, but this is sort of a very specific example of the culture change that I'm shooting for. When you do this, you get fundamentally different decisions. If I put my hand on a hot plate and you feel the pain, right? I'm going to keep putting my hand on that hot plate. Woohoo, it's not bothering me. And you're going, ouch, over here, right? And I might listen to your ouch, but it's not the same as if I felt the ouch, right? So when empowered engineering teams have ownership, when the connection between the decision to put your hand on the hot plate or to not add that extra piece of logging or that extra lever in the product, when those decisions are disconnected from the pain that's felt, some ops guy gets called in, some security guy has to go stand in front of the president and explain why we were hacked. You're going to make different decisions than if you're the one who's feeling the pain when you make those decisions. So, developer gets called in on Saturday when there's an incident. We have to wear the pager now. I wish we didn't have to wear the pager, but he goes into his planning meeting on Monday with his team and he says, if we just had this one extra piece of information in the log and this extra lever in the product, I could have carved out the bad behavior, the bad traffic, and left all the good traffic up and running. I would have been in and out of there on Saturday in 5 minutes. And someone else on the team says, Ops has been asking for those two same things for 3 years now, and we've been ignoring them. But we're going to add it to the product this sprint. So you get fundamentally different decisions when you have ownership shift. And I think that's really key to making this work. It is effective. DevOps results in dramatically faster time to market, which results in happier customers, which results in more revenue. So this directly contributes to the top line. That's why DevOps is being adopted. But what most people don't realize is that it also leads to lower rates of failure and 96 times better, faster recovery time. So the security folks and the QA folks at organizations are often the biggest resistors to this newfangled agile or newfangled DevOps way of development because it's not, there's no gating anymore. We can't control what gets into production. Well, the reality is that you're much better off by being able to respond to what's going on in production really fast than you are in trying to test your way into a secure product. So another definition, software security. When you mention to a developer the word security, he generally thinks of a few things: authentication and authorization, and encryption. So when I'm talking about security, I'm just talking about those three things there. However, that's just like focusing on the bank vault door. What if you put this 3-foot thick, really hard to pick bank vault door on any old room in any old building? The bad guy's going to bother with picking the encryption and the authentication system, breaking all that? Nah, they're just going to bust through the crumbly bricks and mortar of the walls. So every feature that you create, every input to your application, whether that input is a password or a login field, doesn't matter. If it's any input, that is an attack vector, and that is the crumbly bricks and mortar that you have to worry about. The vast majority of security incidents don't occur against encryption, authentication, and authorization. They occur against the regular old code in the product. So the concept of build security in is how we sort of summarize this. Software security puts the focus on the bank vault walls as opposed to just the door, like the traditional way of working on it does. And at least my vision of the DevSecOps transformation puts the focus on the people, the practices, and the tools that are building those walls, that are writing the software. So this is my DevOps continuum. I've used this for many years now. I've had it, when I helped with Rally with Agile transformation, and when I helped with DevOps transformation after leaving Rally. I have grafted on top of this a list of about 30 practices. And I'm not going to go through all these now, but we're going to touch on some of them later. I am going to stop here at this analyze and learn step because I think it's somewhat unique in a lot of folks' DevOps cycles. They're missing this step. And I think it's really the most important aspect of this. And so anyone that misses this step is really sort of doing a disservice. By the way, there's the next click of the slide has them all. I see some folks taking pictures, but you probably want this one. But we're talking about this one block up here, the analyze and learn block now. If you have the very best pen testing group, and they're using the very best tools, what percentage of the latent vulnerabilities in the product do you think they're going to find? Anyone want to hazard a guess? 10%. Very good guess. Excellent guess, as a matter of fact. So I've aggregated research on this subject and done some of my own research on this subject using a technique called capture-recapture. And basically, it's a statistical technique that helps you identify the population of an unknown space. So the biologists use it for fish. How many fish are in a pond? Well, you can't capture all the fish in the pond and count them all. You can't find every vulnerability in the product to know what the denominator is in a percentage calculation like 10%. But you can capture 10 fish in the pond, and you can tag those 10 fish. And then you can release those 10 fish back into the pond, wait till they mix up, and capture another 10 fish. And the percentage of those that second capture that were tagged is the ratio of the first number you captured to the total number in there. So using this statistical technique with two independent vulnerability searching techniques, one tool-based, one human-based, two human-based, two tool-based, you can get an approximation of the total latent vulnerabilities in those. And then in my analysis and in my research, the very best pen testing groups using the very best techniques and tools are only capturing between 5 and 30% of the latent vulnerabilities in the product. What that means is that if you have the very best pen testing group, and every product goes through that, which is not a very strong if in all cases, is not met in all cases, you're still only capturing, you're letting 95% to 70% of the vulnerabilities get out into production. Thinking of an activity like pen testing as a gating function is your mistake. It's not a gating function. We got to stop thinking of it as a gating function. Rather, think of it as simply another feedback mechanism that you add to all the other feedback mechanisms, the automated testing that you have, et cetera, in your pipeline. When you do that and you shift your mindset a little bit, you're going to do something different. You're not just going to respond to the 5 things that the pen testing group found. You're going to do 2 extra things that if you take a learning approach to things, you sort of naturally do. A, you're going to patternize those 5 things that the pen testing group told you and try to look for matches to that pattern elsewhere in the product, as well as in all the other products that your group is responsible for. And you're also going to put in place some preventative measure that will prevent you from ever making that same sort of mistake again. That is the only way that you get up to the high levels of quality, the low levels of defects and vulnerabilities you need to run turbine control systems that control 60% of the world's power. So it's that learning approach that's really, really key. So that list of about 30 or so practices is a lot of stuff, and developers are very busy people. How do you get them to pay attention long enough to get them to adopt even just a handful of that, never mind all of it? Well, I have this 3-part framework I've been evolving over the years that I've used for agile transformations and DevOps transformations, and now I'm using for security transformations at Comcast. And it involves these 3 strong elements, the details of which change in those different environments. The very first element is that you have to win the hearts and minds of developers. And so I've got a lot of writing that sort of focuses on this. The book I'm working on right now, a lot of my blog posting, a lot of my talks, almost completely just focus on this aspect of the thing. That basically you have to build trust. You have to solve that problem that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, that only 21% of the CEOs believe there's enough trust in their organization to actually accomplish these security goals. And I do this first with this set of guiding principles. I call it the DevSecOps Manifesto. Sometimes it's listed here as the Comcast Secure Development Lifecycle Guiding Principles. The first one we've talked about already: build security in rather than bolt it on. Rely on empowered engineering teams more than security specialists. So we've also mentioned that. Implement features securely more than security features. I've already explained to you what I mean by that. Rely on continuous learning more than end-of-phase gates. I just talked to you about that. And this last one, build on culture change more than policy enforcement, is one I haven't spoken about. So I'll briefly describe. You're smiling there. So did you like that, or did the guy next to you just tell you a dirty joke? Okay. Anyway, I thought maybe you had a policy enforcement group at your organization you were going to tell me a scary story about. But what happens? You guys are developers, right? Or you work in lead development teams. What happens? How do you react when the security people come to you with a list of policies that you have to be compliant with? How do you feel? What do you do? What do you say? You go away. You don't want to talk to them. You might hide from them even. Or if you aren't going to completely hide from them, they know who you are. You only show them one app. They don't know the other 20 things that you're building, right? So what if they get a hold of that app and they give you a list of 5 things to deal with? What do you do with those 5 things? Yeah, delay as much as you can. Delay, delay, delay. Somebody else over here said something else. What was that? Put it on the backlog. That would be actually a good answer if the backlog was sort of an agile backlog where you were pulling from it regularly into a sprint. If you meant back burner, then that's sort of the same answer as this guy. But what I see a lot of developers do, and development teams do, is they do checkbox compliance with that. The guy who's sort of on the other side of that doesn't really understand. You may have filled out a survey that gave him these 5 things, right? So you just change your answer on the survey and it goes away, right? You do checkbox compliance. And then in a lot of cases, the policy is wrong for your context. So the right thing to do, of course, nobody has time for this, but the right thing to do would be for you to push back, explain how the policy doesn't fit the context, get an exception or get the policy changed, but nobody bothers to do all that. So policy enforcement, I think, is actually more harmful than useful in accomplishing security goals. Rather, you have to get this culture change. You have to get this ownership of security being adopted by the development team, empowered and development team. I also have this thing I call the pledge, and this is probably the most powerful tool I have used here at Comcast in getting developers to say, oh, this security group is very different than all the other security groups that have come before. So I start off with a statement that I trust you. I trust that you want to do the right thing. I also trust you to make smart trade-off decisions, context-sensitive trade-off decisions. It is perfectly valid for you to essentially decide not to do this security practice that's recommended if you have a bigger business risk that you're trying to address. And that is, you are the folks who are in position to do that. It's not my job to tell you you must do X, Y, and Z. And I don't let any of my staff, my DevSecOps transformation staff, sort of take that policy enforcement approach with folks. But you also want all the information to make sure that those trade-off decisions are smart. You want to know what the real risk is. And it's my job to help provide you what that information is. My team's job is also to make it easy for you to do the recommended thing, as easy as possible. When I first got to Comcast, they had this policy that they were trying to beat teams over the head with for secrets management. Don't put your certificates and your passwords in your source code repositories. Of course, everybody laughs, right? That's you all know that you're not supposed to do that, right? But at Comcast, that was the only way they knew how to do certain things. And so I basically said, let's stop trying to enforce this policy until we come up with a really easy place, a really easy way, a self-service way that development teams can do better secrets management. So we globally licensed HashiCorp Vault. We put our self-service wrapper around it that used our internal SSO system. And then we started asking teams to do it. You know what? We got much further with much less effort in solving the secrets management problem with that approach than in the years before where they just tried to do policy enforcement on that. We also promise to not be the only time you see us is when there's a security incident. I used to have this say 10 times as often, we're going to be focused on preventative measures, but reality is that the best we can do is really 2x, and that's our goal. And the bottom line is that we are no longer going to think of ourselves or act as gatekeepers. Rather, we are going to think of ourselves as self-service toolsmiths and advisors to you. I also have this thing called the trust algorithm. Now, I have a whole talk around this trust algorithm. I have a whole blog series around it, DevSecOpsDays.com. Just search for trust algorithm there and you'll find it. But basically, the idea is credibility plus reliability plus empathy over apparent self-interest is a formula that you can actually use to help build trust. The reason I developed this formula is that someone at Comcast said, trust is not a formula. It's not like you can go out there and teach everyone how to create trust. It's just something that inherently evolves. And I'm like, anything that could inherently evolve could be steered. And so this is my way of sort of steering it. Credibility means, hire developers to go coach developers. Don't get security people to go try to talk to developers. Everyone who works for me is a current developer. We write code every day, all of us on my team. Reliability, if you say you're going to do something, do so. You guys are laughing again. Is it another dirty joke? Or well, yeah, you're the mathematician in the group. There's always one of them, right? One guy who wants to look at the math, right? Have you heard the story about the mathematician and the engineer in the room with the dirty version of it, I won't say. But the clean version of it is with a really great meal at the other end of the room, and the only move you can make is to have the distance every move. And the mathematician says, I may as well not even bother because I'll never get to the meal. And the engineer says, well, I'm going to try because after 4 or 5 iterations, I'll be close enough for my purposes, right? So you go into every meeting. A security person goes into every conversation with the development team with a self-interest. I wouldn't bother with wasting my time if I wasn't going to get something out of this meeting. So this is never zero. So there's my mathematics answer to you. You're always going to get something out of it. But rather than emphasize my interest, I'm the security person and I'm going to get called in by the president if we get hacked, so I want you to do X, Y, and Z. You emphasize the shared interest. We both have stock in the company. If we're in the news next week, our stock is going to go down. Don't you want to do better? Or show them, that's this empathy term here, show them that you do understand their perspective. And even if it is in conflict with my perspective, sometimes I'm going to at least acknowledge yours and give it the weight that it deserves. And so you can counteract the higher denominator with higher terms in the numerator there. Good question, though. Okay, so that was step number 1 of my 3-part framework. Let me see how much time I've got here before we go on. 320, this goes to 350, is that correct? Yeah, so I've only got 4 more minutes, so I'm gonna go fast. Part 2 is make it easier for developers to know what to do. So I have this table of disciplines ordered in the highest bang for the buck and ordered left to right in the highest bang for the buck. So you want this table to turn green from the upper left-hand corner out. This is an actual example of a real team I just did an assessment on earlier this week, or facilitated a self-assessment for earlier this week. So they don't quite match that pattern, but there's a lot more green in the upper left corner than there is in the lower right corner, which is sort of good. And we go through each cell and we get them to color code each cell based upon how strongly they think they're doing the thing in that cell. And that's the brightness of the green, the darkness of the green. And then at the end of this meeting, this 90-minute self-assessment where we're all sitting in a room together, it's not a survey that we follow up on later, we're actually talking through these things. I asked them, pick 1, 2, maybe 3 of these cells you want to turn a darker shade of green in the next quarter. And I will do everything in my power, and my team will do everything in our power to help you with those goals that you are setting. So they're still the team's goals. They're not my goals, but I'm going to do everything I can to help you with your goals, is the way we word it. And we get almost 100%, 90-some% of the teams that we come back a quarter later and we do a half-hour reassessment with every team, 90-some% have achieved all of their goals, and many have achieved the stretch goals that we set at the end of this session. So it's very effective at getting teams on this path of self-improvement. They own the self-improvement. They feel like they're doing it for their own benefit and for the company's benefit. So I have a little blow up here. I was going to talk about a few of these, but I'm going to just skip that in the interest of time. The third element of this 3-part framework for culture change is to get management involved. And we do this with a visualization. In fact, I just had a meeting earlier today with the president of Comcast, Tony Warner, where we showed him a different version of this radar. And basically what this says is that this is the percentage of your organization that we have not even spoken to yet, that have not participated in a self-assessment. This is the percentage of your organization that's almost there on this getting yellow belt trained. And this is the percentage of your organization that's all the way there. And we basically go through these top 6 practices. So I don't have the whole table up there. I just have the upper left corner there. And what I want to do is I want to get Tony to set a goal, the president of Comcast set a goal, and this one we missed, obviously, but we set a goal of getting everyone yellow belt trained by Q1 2018, and then have that trickle down throughout the organization and have that actually be what people drive towards. This gives teams permission to work on this stuff as opposed to just cranking out features, because it's sponsored by the president, it's trickled down to his direct reports, which trickle down to his mid-level managers, which trickle down all the way to the teams. So I have a talk tomorrow on tools in this space. It's called DevSecOps is not just lipstick on a pig. And my point is that a lot of traditional security tools claim to be DevOps oriented, and they really are not. They're just claiming it. They didn't change the tool at all, and it really doesn't work in a DevOps environment. I'll basically describe which of those tools and the characteristics of them that meet and do not meet that. It's in Woodrow Wilson A, 12:30 tomorrow. So that's the talk tomorrow. You can read it at the Trust Algorithm here. You connect with me on LinkedIn, please. Also, I'm supposed to remind you to rate this talk. So everyone who liked the talk, please pick up your phone right now and put it in. And those of you who didn't, come up here and I'll help you fill it out for you. Thank you very much.